Hi guys! Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. This is Miss Sean from Keep It Up with Sean, and medyo matagal na nga yung last na lecture video natin. So, for this video, we are going to talk about the biological properties of the soil. But then, meron akong bonus dito. I prepared few slides na pahabol dun sa last video on soil fertility and plant nutrition. Sana makatulong to sa inyo. And if you are new to my channel, please click the subscribe button and like if you like this video. And you can also share this video to your friends na naghahanda para sa upcoming board examination. While preparing for this video, I am very thankful kasi marami din akong natutunan. I appreciate soil microbiology now compared 20 years ago nung nag-aaral pa ako. I learned a lot while preparing this video, and I'm happy to share my knowledge and sana makatulong to sa inyo. If you have any questions, you can always send me a message. I also have my Facebook page, Keep It Up with Sean. You can also send me there. And let me know kung meron kayo mga suggestion, comments, so that I can share to you whatever info that I have. And watch out for the next videos kasi marami pa akong i-prepare na lecture materials. So, thank you again, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye! Hi guys! Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. This is Miss Sean, and for today's video, we are going to talk about the biological properties of the soil. It will be about soil microorganisms as well as macroorganisms. Excited ako to present this video kasi ang dami ko ring natutunan when I prepare these slides. As a review, in the previous lecture videos, we discussed about the chemical properties of the soil, particularly soil colloids, the soil pH, and soil fertility and plant nutrition. I hope meron kayong natutunan doon kasi it's a very, very interesting topic and very important kasi yung concept ng videos na yun are very basic and to understand soils, and it is very important to understand especially for crop production. So, sana hindi nyo yun na-miss kasi marami yung information na makakatulong sa inyo. Especially not only when you prepare this licensure examination, but later on if you venture into farming or anything, it can help you a lot. Meron ako mga extra info, so I added these few slides as a supplement to those videos, particularly in soil fertility and plant nutrition. So as there are also other factors in formulating fertilizer recommendation kasi when we discuss the fertility and plant nutrition, nakasama din doon yung how to calculate fertilizer recommendations. When you formulate fertilizer recommendation, there are different factors affecting it. Hindi ka lang basta-basta nagpo-formulate ng fertilizer recommendations. You need to depend upon different factors. One factor is the season of the year. Kasi kadalasan yung mga crops, they require higher rates of fertilizer during dry season than wet season kasi there will be greater solar energy available. So pag maaraw, process of photosynthesis of the plants is very, very active. So they need a lot of energy, and how to sustain those energy is we provide nutrients to the plant. So kaya depende dun kung gaano kadami yung ire-recommend natin na fertilizer kung maaraw or maulan. As a summary, during dry season, there will be greater solar energy available, kaya there will be more vigorous plant metabolism and therefore high demand of nutrients during dry season. But then be careful that during dry season, kung maaraw at saka walang tubig, kahit gaano pa kadami yung i-a-apply mong abono, kung hindi madi-dissolve yung abono, it will still be useless. So you also have to consider other factors like presence of moisture. Dapat those nutrients, those fertilizer na in-apply mo, sana magamit siya by plants by natutunaw siya. Kasi hindi siya maa-absorb ng plants kung nandun lang siya sa ibabaw at hindi siya na-dissolve ng water. Second factor is the economic value of the crop. Economic value of the crop. Kasi tandaan nyo, ang presyo ng mga abono ay very, very high, lalo na ngayon. So, higher fertilizer rates and cost may be justified for high-value crops. Kung mahal yung pagbebenta mo ng crops, maybe it can be justified na mag-aabono ka ng marami. So, for lower-value crops, the value of returns at high fertilizer rate may not offset the cost. Kung ibebenta mo lang naman yung mga crops mo ng mababang presyo, and then nag-apply ka ng maraming abono, lugi ka, 'di ba? So thus the value of the crop yield must always be pitted against the fertilizer cost. You always have to consider the economic return of your fertilizer application, because high yield of crops do not always mean high economic returns. Posible na masyado kang maraming naani kasi masyado ka ring maraming in-apply na abono at saka other inputs like pesticide, fungicide, others. Masyadong mahal yung seeds na ginamit mo or other factors then, yeah. So yun, it doesn't guarantee na kesyo ang taas ng ani mo, pataas na yung economic return mo. So you always have to consider the economic value of the crop. For example, kung nagbebenta ka ng, magkano ba ang presyo ngayon ng, hindi ako masyadong familiar sa presyo ng mga gulay sa Pilipinas, guys. So, example lang to, hindi ko alam kung it's still actual. For example, kung itinatanim mo ay petchay, for example, and you applied too much fertilizer, and then nung ibinebenta mo siya sa palengke ay magkano lang yung benta mo ng petchay. So, sayang yung abono na in-apply mo kasi hindi mo siya nakukuha. Especially pag mababa yung presyo ng petchay, hindi mo nakuha yung economic return ng crops mo kasi lugi ka nung in-apply sa presyo ng in-apply ng mga inputs. So, for example, asparagus, for example, or other high-valued crops, siguro pwede siyang ma-justify na mahal na nag-apply ka ng abono, ng maraming abono, kasi mahal din yung presyo niya. So, you always have to consider the economic value of the crop. Third factor is the nutrient preference of particular type of crops. Kasi iba't ibang crops, they also have higher demand for nutrients. Hindi sila pantay-pantay ng pangangailangan. So for example, grain crops demand high for nitrogen, the legumes for phosphorus, and sugar, fiber, tuber, and oil crops demand more for potassium. So isipin mo rin kung ano yung nutrient preference ng particular type. Hindi ibig sabihin na ito yung crop mo, applyan mo siya ng same amount of nutrients kasi iba-iba yung kanyang preference. May ibang crops na ang gusto niya ay potassium or yung gusto niya is phosphorus. So yung iba naman gusto niya is nitrogen. Like for example, leafy vegetables, you don't have to apply a lot of potassium kasi yung demand ng mga most leafy vegetables are nitrogen. So yun. Kasi yung potassium naman is more on flowering plants, more on fruit-bearing plants. So i-adjust mo rin ngayon yung fertilizer recommendation mo. So you need to consider it in the interpretation of soil test. So the sufficiency level of a nutrient for a certain crop may not be a sufficient level for another crop. Remember, there will be different critical nutrient levels for a particular crop. So for example, kung ang critical level nutrient ng saging ay ganito, hindi siya ibig sabihin na ganun din yung critical nutrient level ng mangga or ng iba't ibang crops. So you always have to check what are the nutritional requirements of each crop. And then, we also have soil pH. Soil pH is very, very important because it will affect the behavior and availability of applied nutrients. Some of the nutrients, kahit pa masyadong marami yung in-apply mong abono, kung yung pH mo is not favorable, those nutrients that you apply, those fertilizers that you applied will not be available for the absorption ng mga tanim. So, sayang lang din siya. So, you always have to check your pH. So, acidic soils have greater phosphorus fixing ability. So, hindi siya na-available ng tanim. Therefore, phosphorus fertilizer application must consider the proportion of phosphorus that will be immobilized in the soil. So, i-adjust mo ngayon kung gaano kadami yung phosphorus or yung pH na kailangan mong ma-adjust para ma-available siya ngayon sa tanim. And then, the last factor is yung soil moisture condition. Diba remember when the first factor is about the season of the year. Kasi sabi ko nga na pag maaraw, there will be more plant needs a lot of nutrients kasi vigorous yung kanyang metabolism. And then, you have to consider also the soil moisture kasi kahit gaano pa kadami yung abono na ina-apply mo, kung hindi naman siya ma-available sa tanim, useless din siya. So moisture, tubig, does not only affect the solubility of applied fertilizers, but also affect the activity of the microorganisms. Later on, we will discuss about microorganisms. And under limited available of moisture, lower fertilizers must be used, and since microbial activity, particularly those relating to mineralization of nutrients, is inhibited, there will be less native supply of nutrients is expected. So you always have to consider also the soil moisture conditions. That's why ita-timing mo ngayon kung kailan ka mag-a-apply ng abono. Kung now we have a forecast, kung tingin mo ay may El Nino at masyadong mahaba yung ngayon yung kung panahon ng tagtuyot, you have to minimize or you have to postpone your application of fertilizer. Kasi sayang din siya kung lahat ng mga abono na ina-apply mo, particularly nitrogen, like ammonium-containing fertilizers, mag-volatilize lang siya. So meaning, magsisingaw lang siya sa atmosphere. So hindi siya na-absorb ng tanim. So sayang siya. So I hope you learned something from those extra slides. And let me know if you have any questions, and I'm very, very willing to answer your questions. And now, we are going to talk about the biological properties of the soil. And I'm very, very thankful to when I prepare this slides kasi mas na-appreciate ko ngayon yung topic na to. When I was doing it in the university, I think my soil micro teacher was Ma'am Fe. Hindi ko siya masyadong na-appreciate kasi ako ganun ka-interested sa microscope. Wala akong nakikita every time na tumitingin ako sa microscope. No, those microorganisms, hindi siya ganun ka-interesting sa akin. But then now, I realized na, very exciting pala yun. Siguro kung na-build lang yung interest ko at that time, I think maybe plant pathology or maybe other field will also be mas na-appreciate ko siya. But anyway, I learned something from this, and then I hope you also learn from this video. When we talk about the biological properties of the soil, it will be more about the microorganisms. When we say microorganisms, there are different organisms that live in the soil. Some of them, we don't see them. Some we can see. And some organisms subsist on living plants. So there will be herbivores. They live on different on living plants. May mga microorganisms naman na nagde-depend about dun sa dead plant debris like the detritivores. Some consume animals like predators. Some devour fungi, yung kinakain nila yung fungi, fungivores, or bacteria, bacterivores. And then meron namang iba na nakikitira lang. So they just live but do not consume, while other organisms are considered as parasites. So alin ba tayo dyan? Okay? Then we also have autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that can feed themselves, meaning self-relying, and obtain their carbon mainly from the carbon dioxide and their energy from photosynthesis or oxidation of various elements. Samantala, ang heterotrophs are organisms that feed on other organisms to obtain energy. So sa ibang organisms sila nakasalalay to obtain their energy, and they rely on organic compounds for their carbon and energy needs. So those are the autotrophs and heterotrophs. So ito yung organisms in the food web. So the autotrophs are organisms that can feed themselves by harnessing light energy from photosynthesis to make organic molecules such as carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids out of inorganic raw materials such as carbon dioxide, water, nitrogen compounds, and others. And they are the primary producers because in the food web, because they are the first link in the food chain. And without their ability to capture light, the organic matter life as we know now will not be exist. Kasi sila yung primary producers. Sila yung primary involved in the food chain. While the heterotrophs, they are organisms that feed on other organisms to obtain their energy. They are dependent on other organisms. Then we also hear a lot about the flora and fauna. Ano nga ba yung flora and fauna? Flora is defined as all the naturally occurring native plants. Plants po siya of a particular region. It indicates all forms of plant life, more generally used to represent the plant life of a particular phase. So ito yung native na mga tanim na tumutubo sa isang lugar. Flora. On the other hand, fauna naman ay is all the animal life. Animal, yung fauna, present in a particular place or at a particular time period. It indicates all forms of animal life, more generally used to represent the animal life native to a particular place. So it is flora and fauna. So ito yung table by Niall Brady and Ware. These are the generalized grouping of different organisms found in the soil. So we have the macrofauna and we also have the macroflora. When we say macro, ibig sabihin niya malalaki. Micro naman are very, very small. So the macrofauna are greater than 2 millimeter. So these are all heterotrophs, largely herbivores and detritivores. So ano nga yung herbivores? Ito yung nakasalalay, nakabase upon dun sa living plants. And detritivores naman, on the other hand, are, ito siya, kumakain ngayon sa dead plant debris. So, tanim pa rin yung kanilang source ng energy. So, detritivores and herbivores. So, these are mostly vertebrates. Meron siya nakalagay dyan na example. I'm not familiar with them, guys. And then yung mga arthropods, like mga insects. Ants, beetles na nakikita natin, di ba? And then we have the annelids, yung mga earthworms. And we have the mollusk. Ito yung mga snails and slugs na nakikita natin sa soil. Macro siya kasi nakikita natin siya. And then we also have the macroflora. They are largely autotrophs. They rely on the sunlight for photosynthesis. And these are the vascular plants, the feeder roots, and the bryophytes, yung mga mosses na nakikita natin. And then we also have the mesofauna, microfauna. So mesofauna is between 0.1 to 2 millimeter yung kanilang size. So these are all heterotrophs, largely detritivores, yung nagre-rely sa dead decaying plants litters, and all heterotrophs, largely predators. So same pa rin, so may mga arthropods, annelids na mga worms, and then yung iba naman ay arthropods. And then we also have microfauna, which is less than 0.1 millimeter. Fauna siya. These are the detritivores, predators, fungivores, bacterivores. These are the nematodes, the rotifera, and the protozoa, which is generally classified in the kingdom Protista. We also have now the microflora, which is less than 0.1 millimeter. These are the largely autotrophs, largely heterotrophs, and autotrophs. So ito yung mga example niya, like the vascular plants, the algae, fungi, actinomycetes, and bacteria, and cyanobacteria. Bakit ko siya mention dito? Kasi when we are going to talk later, we are going to talk about the different microorganisms and macroorganisms. So, bakit siya importante? Kasi these organisms, they are responsible for a lot of biochemical changes in the soil. They are the agents in the decomposition of plant and animal residues, which is necessary in nutrient cycling and stimulates plant growth. So they have an effect to the plants. And it also improves soil structure through aggregation. So the role of microorganisms is to maintain soil health and contribute to crop performance is clear. For sure, nakikita natin yan. A lot of literature, a lot of topics discuss about the importance of microbes in the soil. But then, the soil biological component is extremely difficult to observe and manage. Hindi natin masyadong it's difficult to manage kasi hindi natin siya nakikita with our naked eyes. Kaya, at saka they are more affected by different factors. Init, ulan, moisture conditions. So, it's so difficult to manage them. The soil microbes, the biological communities, and the functions they perform are dynamic, complex, pabago-bago, and they are not easily interpreted for field practices kasi hindi nga natin siya nakikita and so difficult to manage them. But now, the utilization of soil microorganisms are getting more attention kung usong-uso yung paggamit ng mga inoculants, paggamit ng mga fermented na mga fertilizers to improve the microbial communities in the soil. And a lot of farmers in the Philippines are using it now kasi nga they are looking for alternative source of fertilizers kasi masyadong mahal yung mga chemical fertilizers ngayon. So they are looking for alternatives na makakagamit ng mga mas murang source ng abono na makapagdagdag sa population ng mga microorganisms sa lupa. So these are more encouraged now to practice more holistic management approaches on their farms. Uso na rin ngayon yung mga organic production, di ba? So yung mga gulay na organically produced or yung mga plantations, even they venture now in organic production. Of course, organic production, hindi man ganun kadami yung yield na kanilang nakukuha, but then the prices for their products are also higher compared to conventionally produced crops. So these are the relative number and biomass of fauna and flora found in the soil. So in the microflora, so we have the bacteria, fungi, actinomycetes, and algae. In the fauna, we have the protozoa, nematodes, earthworms, collembola, mites, and other fauna. So this is the table, the relative numbers and biomass of fauna and flora commonly found in the surface, which is about 15 centimeter of soil. And the metabolic activity is generally related to biomass. So the microflora and earthworms dominate the life of most soils. So kung titingnan niyo dyan, sa microflora, we have the bacteria, actinomycetes, fungi, and algae. In fauna, we have the protozoa, nematodes, mites, collembola, earthworms, and other fauna. Kung makikita niyo dyan yung number, ito yung population nila per square meter. So 10 to the 13 to 10 to the 14. Ang dami niyan, guys, sa bacteria. And then, sa fauna naman, yung pinakamadami is the protozoa per square meter. So meron naman dyan is per gram. But then, because ang metabolic activity is related to biomass, so we have to check the biomass now. So the biomass there is fungi dominates, which is 1,000 to 15,000 kilogram per hectare. And that is 100 to 15,000 gram per square meter. So particularly fungi and earthworms dominate the life of most soils. Hindi ibig sabihin na kasi masyadong marami siya sa lupa, marami din yung kanyang metabolic activity kasi the metabolic activity is related to biomass. Kaya iba-iba, kahit pa gaano siya kadami sa lupa, when you compare their metabolic activity, it will be dependent on their biomass production. These are the major group of soil microorganisms. We will discuss them one by one. Number one is bacteria. Bacteria, ano ba nga ba ang bacteria? We cannot see them with our naked eye, guys. So you need microscope to find them. It is a whole group of microorganisms that lack a true nucleus and usually having DNA in a single molecule. They are some of the smallest and most abundant microbes in the soil. There is an estimated 60,000 different bacteria species. Ang dami nila, guys. Most which have yet to be even named. Yung iba wala pang mga pangalan. And each has its own particular roles and capabilities. They live in the top centimeter of soil where organic matter is present. They are the most abundant microbes and equal to 1/2 of the microbial biomass in the soil. They can be 100,000 to several hundred millions per gram of soil. And the common soil bacteria in the soil includes Arthrobacter, Bacillus, Clostridium, and Micrococcus. There are still others, but ito yung mga pinaka-common na soil bacteria. They are single-celled organisms and there can be billion of bacteria in a single gram of soil. Kaya 'di ba, yung mga nanay natin every time na naglalaro tayo ng lupa, they always ask us to wash our hands kasi ang daming germs ng ating mga kamay. So you have to really wash your hands when you are involved, when you are working with the soil kasi there's a lot of microorganisms present in the soil na posibleng nakaka-attach sa mga kamay natin, and when we eat, maybe it will have an effect on us. So the population of bacteria can boom or bust in the space of a few days in response to changes in soil moisture, soil temperature, or carbon substrate. Kaya mahirap siyang i-manage kasi every day nag-change yung condition ng lupa natin. So it can be dry, it can be acidic, or it can be malamig or mainit masyado na yung ibang mga bacteria ay namamatay at saka hindi siya active. Some bacteria species are very fragile and may be killed by slight changes in the soil environment. While others are extremely tough, masyadong tawag tough in Tagalog, mamaya. They can able to withstand severe heat, cold, or drying. So kahit pa masyadong mainit, masyadong dry yung lupa, they can still exist. And some bacteria are dependent on specific plant species. So, yung iba naman ay mayroong mga preference. So, marami siya kung yung tanim ay ganito, konti lang siya kung yung tanim ay ganito. And some can lie dormant for decades waiting for favorable condition. Present siya sa lupa, pero since hindi nga ganun ka favorable yung condition, nandyan lang siya. It's not active, but then when the conditions are favorable, ayan, active sila ulit. So, they are dormant. Dormant, natutulog lang sila. Diba? And then, there are different types of bacteria and they are classified into 4 categories. Number 1 is the bacteria shape. So, kasi marami sa mga, ito yung kadalasang shape ng bacteria. Some are rod, sphere, or spiral. So, ito yung mga example niya. The spheres, the cocci, the rods, the bacilli, and the spirals. So, yun yung kanyang formation. However, this may become complex as many bacteria have different shapes and arrangement. Na-mention ko nga, di ba, ang daming species ng bacteria. I think more than 600,000 species ng bacteria. So, yung mga species ng bacteria na yun, iba din yung kanilang mga shape. So, it depends dun. Kaya mahirap siyang i-classify kasi nga they are complex and have different shapes and arrangement. Pero namang category is about the aerobic versus the anaerobic bacteria. Ano nga ba yung aerobic at saka anaerobic? Katulad sa atin, the bacteria also need oxygen. Others don't need oxygen. So, the oxygen level often determine bacteria's activity in the soil. Most aerobic soil bacteria, aerobic, pag ibig sabihin ng aerobic, they prefer well-oxygenated soil, mayroong oxygen, and use this oxygen to decompose most carbon compounds. Samantala, ang anaerobic bacteria, They prefer environments with no oxygen, anaerobic, no oxygen, and are mainly found in the intestine of animals. They are often associated with manure and are known to kill off aerobic bacteria in the soil. Kaya nagkakaroon ngayon ng competition. Pag maraming anaerobic, namamatay yung ibang mga aerobic in the soil. Bacteria in the soil. Kaya dapat i-manage natin yan. So that's why it's very, very difficult to manage microbial activity in the soil kasi hindi natin siya nakikita. Hindi natin alam kung ano yung dominant present ng organisms na found in the soil. Kasi, yun nga, nasabi ko nga na pag masyadong marami yung anaerobic bacteria, it can be possible that they kill the aerobic bacteria. Third classification is the gram-negative versus the gram-positive bacteria. So how do they determine if it's gram-negative or gram-positive? They use staining agent in the lab na nag-a-attach dun sa bacteria. So the gram-negative bacteria, they are generally smaller in size and they are sensitive to drought and water stress. Ito yung mga gram-negative. Samantalang naman, pag gram-positive yung bacteria, they are much larger in size. They tend to resist the water stress. They have thicker cell walls and negative charges on the outside cell wall surface. Ito ngayon yung cell wall structure ng gram-positive versus gram-negative bacteria. Yun siya. So, kanyang difference. Then, the fourth category is others. Others, ang dami ng others, diba? So, when we talk about other factors, it depends upon the growth and the reproduction of the bacteria. So, since usong-uso na nga ngayon yung advancement in DNA sequencing, the scientists now are classifying bacteria based on the type of environment they inhabit. Because some bacteria can live in extreme heat, like hot springs, or extreme cold, like the Arctic waters. And then, some bacteria can also be classified depending on where they live, like the acidity of their environment. So, acidic versus alkaline environment. So, those are the types of bacteria classified into 4 categories. Ito naman ngayon yung mga types of bacteria. So, we have the decomposers. These are the bacteria play an important role in the composition of organic materials, especially in the early stages of decomposition when moisture levels are high. So, dapat merong mga tubig. It's necessary in the decomposition of organic materials. Kung matatandaan nyo, kung meron kayo mga plant litters, like yung mga dahon ng kahoy or yung mga, paano ko ba na-explain? When you have your garbage, particularly plant debris, and then tinambak nyo siya dyan, and then masyadong mainit, walang ulan. Kung natatandaan nyo, yung itinambak nyo mga damo dyan and damo or mga plant litters, after 1 week, it still looks the same, di ba? Parang walang masyadong nag-change. But then when that particular garbage, that particular damo and plant litters, kung merong ulan, nabasa siya, after 1 week, nag-iba na yung kanyang appearance because a lot of the bacteria will be involved in the decomposition of organic materials, especially dun sa early stages of. So, tubig is very, very important. Moisture. In the later stages of decomposition, once na nag-decompose na yon, fungi tend to dominate. So, nakikita nyo na dyan yung mga molds. So, fungi na yung dominant species. So, the Bacillus subtilis and the Pseudomonas fluorescens are examples of decomposer bacteria. Addition of these bacteria have not been proved to accelerate formation of compost or humus in the soil. Then we also have the nitrogen fixer bacteria. For example, we have the rhizobia. Rhizobium bacteria can be inoculated onto legume seeds to fix nitrogen in the soil. So these nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in special root nodules on legumes, such as beans, clovers, and they extract nitrogen gas from the air and convert it into forms that plants can use. Kaya it's very interesting to have this bacteria, because this form of nitrogen fixation can add the equivalent of more than 100 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare per year. So, ang laking tulong na rin yan, at saka ang laking reduction na rin yan sa cost mo kung magiging free ngayon yung 100 kilo of nitrogen na mapoprovide mo by just incorporating nitrogen fixer bacteria in the soil. So the Azotobacter, Azospirillum, and the Agrobacterium, Gluconobacter, Flavobacterium, Herbaspirillum are all examples of free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria often associated with non-legumes. Kasi yung kanina, yung rhizobium is associated with legumes. Itong mga bacteria naman to are associated with non-legume crops. So to date, inoculating the soil with these organisms has not proved an effective means of increasing nitrogen fixation for non-legume crops. So although maraming mga tests na kinandak, yung talagang tested ng talaga is mostly the effect of the rhizobium on legume crops. Yung sa non-legume is still need more research and studies. Then we also have disease suppressors. The Bacillus megatherium is an example of a bacterium that has been used on some crops to suppress the disease-causing fungus Rhizoctonia solanae. So, maraming mga bacteria na nag-i-inhibit ng growth ng iba't ibang mga diseases or fungus, for example. And even the Pseudomonas fluorescens may also be used against the Rhizoctonia, which affects different crops. And also, the Bacillus subtilis has been used to suppress seedling blight of sunflowers caused by Alternalia helianthi. There's a lot of bacteria have been commercialized worldwide for disease suppression. Usong-uso yan ngayon, but then the suppression is often specific to particular disease of particular crops and may only be effective in certain circumstances. So, hindi siya ibig sabihin na pag i-apply mo tong bacteria na to, it will be valid for all plants. Mostly, they work on a particular disease of a particular crops and only effective in certain circumstances. Kaya, dapat yung condition ng lupa mo, condition ng other factors should also be favorable for the growth of this bacteria, which suppresses the disease. Then we also have the aerobes and the anaerobes. So, na-mention ko nga kanina, yung aerobic bacteria are those that need oxygen. So, where the soil is well drained, aerobes tend to dominate. Anaerobic naman ay yung hindi nangangailangan ng oxygen and may find oxygen toxic. And this group includes very ancient types of bacteria that live inside soil aggregates. Anaerobic bacteria favor wet, poorly drained soils and can produce toxic compounds that can limit root growth and predispose plants to root diseases. So for example, kung ang lupa natin ay submerged sa tubig, di ba? So for example, pag ang lupa natin ay fully submerged sa tubig, basang-basa. So, ang tendency niyan is na mamatay yung mga bacteria na aerobic kasi wala ngang oxygen. And it will also cause the roots, yung mga ugat, di ba? Yung mga ugat ng mga tanim ay namamatay kasi wala siyang oxygen and the roots needs oxygen. And so, usong-usong na rin dyan na nalalanta siya, namamatay siya kasi present ngayon yung iba't ibang mga diseases sa ugat, root diseases. Then, we also have the actinobacteria. This bacteria helps to slowly break down humates and humic acids in soils. And they prefer non-acidic soils with pH higher than 5. And of course, we also have the sulfur oxidizers bacteria because the soil minerals contain sulfides, but this form of sulfur is largely unavailable to plants. Remember, the form of sulfur that is absorbable by plants are sulfates. So, pag sulfides yung nandun sa lupa, hindi siya ganun ka-readily available to plants. So, we have here the Bacillus bacteria, which can convert sulfides into sulfates, a form of sulfur which plants can use. So, how is sulfur transformed by microorganisms in the soil? So, yung major sulfur in soil is in the organic fraction. The concentration of sulfate, the form available for plant, is low, typically less than 0.1% of the total sulfur, and the microorganisms play a dominant role in the sulfur cycle. Remember, guys, that sulfur is one of the macronutrients in the soil needed by the plants. And in organic matter of the soil is found in bound form, resistant to decomposition. Hindi siya ganun ka madaling ma-decompose. It is released only after some time through microbial decomposition by decomposition of organic sulfur compound, microbial assimilation or immobilization of sulfur and their incorporation into microbial cells, oxidation of inorganic compounds such as sulfides, thiosulfates, and elemental sulfur, and the reduction of sulfate and other anions to sulfides. So, it takes time for sulfur to be transformed. So, yung mga microorganisms present in the soil are very, very helpful to do this process. The sulfur in its various organic and inorganic form is readily metabolized in soil, and its transformation is governed to a large extent by the environmental circumstance that affect the composition and activity of the microflora. So, in anaerobic condition, ibig sabihin walang oxygen, sulfate is reduced and sulfides accumulate through the action of sulfate-reducing bacteria, predominantly of the genus Desulfovibrio and Desulfomaculum. And these microorganisms use sulfate as the hydrogen acceptor in their energy-yielding metabolism, reducing sulfate to sulfide. Thus, under an aerobic condition, the sulfate availability may be limited in the soil. On the other hand, in aerated environment, ibig sabihin may oxygen, the combined sulfur is ultimately metabolized to sulfate. And the soil microorganisms capable of oxidizing elemental sulfur to sulfate are members of the genus Bacillus. And these microorganisms are gram-negative, non-sporulating rods which are predominantly aerobes. And the oxidation of elemental sulfur leads to the formation of enormous amount of sulfuric acid, which decreases soil pH because it added acidity in the soil. So that's why you have to maintain the balance now between the aerobic bacteria and anaerobic bacteria, because if one dominates, it has an adverse effect on the availability of nutrients and can affect the plants itself. And then iron is also precipitated by soil bacteria. Iron is always present in the soil because it's one of the major constituents of the Earth's crust. But then it is often in form not available for plant use. And that's why there's a lot of deficiencies of iron encountered. And the iron bacteria are responsible for the microbial transformation of iron through the oxidation of ferrous, from ferrous to ferric, the iron reduction, the iron precipitation from organic salt. The iron from ferric ammonia citrate is precipitated by the iron bacteria, and the organic portion of the molecules provides energy for microbial proliferation. As the citrate portion of the molecule is decomposed, the iron is released, results from a direct action upon the organic portion of the compound rather than upon the iron. And this process happens even without air or with air. So even in the process or absence of air. So what are the benefits of soil bacteria? One is it provides large amounts of nitrogen to plants, which is usually deficient in soils. Second is the bacteria secrete enzymes that make phosphorus more soluble and available to plants. And together with bacteria, fungi are important decomposers as they convert indigestible organic material into forms that other organisms may use. And the fungal hyphae physically bind salt particles together, which creates stable aggregates, increasing water infiltration and soil water holding capacity, improving plant growth. So masyadong marami siya mga benefits. And then, the bacteria also tend to outnumber fungi in tilled or disrupted soils because fungi prefer more acidic environments without soil disturbance. Most fungi need oxygen to survive, while bacteria are capable of surviving in dry or flooded conditions due to their small size, high numbers, and ability to live in small microsites within the soil. But then, ang ganda pala ng bacteria. So how are we going to manage them? Bacteria population in the soil is suppressed by dry conditions, acidity, salinity, soil compaction, and lack of organic matter. So kung ang lupa natin ay dry, acidic, saline, compacted, at saka walang masyadong source ng organic matter, the population of bacteria will also be suppressed and will be limited. Hindi sila dumadami yung mga bacteria. Except in the case of certain seed inoculations, it is very, very difficult to build desirable populations of bacteria just by adding them into the soil kasi masyadong maraming factors na nakakaapekto sa kanilang growth and population. Even if you add and introduce bacteria to the soil, as long as the conditions are not favorable for them to grow, it will not be effective. Kaya mahirap i-manage ngayon yung microbial population in the soil. So there is a more effective approach to bacteria management, and this often address soil health problems such as acidity and compaction. So first, dapat ma-address muna natin ngayon yung problema ng lupa natin, particularly acidic ba yung lupa natin or alkaline and compacted. And we have to ensure that there is a good ground cover of grass or mulch kasi sila yung magiging source ng pagkain ng mga bacteria. We need to build organic matter through practices such as green manure crops, mulching, strategic grazing, and minimum tillage. So when we do this approach, we support healthy populations of soil bacteria. And remember that poor drainage encourages also undesirable anaerobic bacteria. And we also need to reduce the compaction, and we need to build soil organic matter to improve water infiltration without compromising moisture storage, and will discourage anaerobic bacteria kasi yung pag masyadong maraming anaerobic bacteria, it will kill the aerobic bacteria. And also, it will also cause root diseases, kaya namamatay yung mga tanim natin. So, to summarize, population of soil bacteria change rapidly depending on moisture, time of year, type of crop, mulching, and other factors, and acidity also. Thus, healthy population of soil bacteria are encouraged by ground cover and organic matter. So I think that's all for today's video, guys. Hanggang dito muna tayo kasi masyadong maraming pa tayong i-discuss. The next slide will be about actinomycetes, and masyadong mahaba na yung video na to. So I will pause for this, stop in this video, and then the next video we are going to continue the other microorganisms, and we will begin the next presentation with a group of actinomycetes. So I hope meron kayong natutunan dito, and let me know kung if you have any questions and you have any comments so that I can address them in my next video. Thank you very much, guys, and if you are new to my channel, please click the subscribe button and like if you like, and it will help me a lot. Thank you, and see you again next time. Bye!